And so, as the title of the presentation shows, we are really blessed to be able to, Armand and I get to do a lot of trainings like this together. We're really fortunate in being able to bring both sides of the story and a unique and just dynamic aspect of things that don't normally get talked about when we're talking about the issue of sex trafficking and how it's plaguing our community. There's a lot of deep-rooted issues in this, and so we really are honored to be able to bring you both sides of the story. Armand, you have anything you want to say before we get started?
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that's on board. I hope you're in store. I was told I will reframe a little bit because we go really, really deep. This is not just an issue that we're coming out of a textbook or a documentary or we studied. This is firsthand experience. This is the loss of life. This is the gaining of life. You're about to get our soul, okay? So just strap your seatbelt on. Please don't have your emotions on your sleeve. If you really, really want to know, really, really want to hear the real, I guess you do. That's why you have us on here, or you could have had somebody else. Leah, Amelia, great friends, great queens. I love you both, and I just feel happy that you guys are both the host of this. And let's rock. Let's go.
All right. So, domestic human sex trafficking 101. Now, when preface, we are going to be talking specifically about urban domestic sex trafficking. Keep in mind that when it comes to the topic of human trafficking, there are many, many dynamics that go along with this. There are many different types of human trafficking. We are speaking specifically to our personal experiences with urban domestic sex trafficking, which is basically in a nutshell going to be the more hip hop culture type of sex trafficking that you're going to see. Majority of what you're going to see in San Diego is going to intersect with urban sex trafficking. So it's really great to have this information presented obviously by myself, Jamie Johnson, and Armand King. And so our focus on today's presentation is going to be domestic sex trafficking and how this affects not only our country, but specifically our community and specifically here in San Diego and what that looks like. If you hear these terms, the game, the life, pimping and hoeing, commercial sexual exploitation, those are the terms that are all referring back to the issue of domestic sex trafficking. Again, my name is Jamie Johnson. I am a lived experience expert, CEO of Sisters of the Streets, which, as was stated, focuses on empowering those that are impacted by domestic sex trafficking. I do not focus only on the person that has been victimized. So to say, we do support all aspects, which could be the buyer or the person that we are considering the pimp or the trafficker. We believe that everybody needs those resources and that support, and support you however it is we can. And when I say lived experience expert, from my point of view, you also might hear survivor leaders, survivor. I prefer the term lived experience expert because I believe it encompasses more of a professional aspect and helps me to step outside of just being a victim of sex trafficking at one point. So we are going to talk about the exploited population first. And when we say exploited, that would be the person that is being sex trafficked or experiencing the sex trafficking. I use the term exploited as a general overview. And so when we talk about the exploited population, there's a set of vulnerabilities that are very much common, not necessarily that every person not necessarily every person is going to have all of these, but this list is going to be a majority of somebody can check off at least a couple of these, and that has led them to becoming vulnerable, to becoming exploited. So I'm just going to go through these. I know you can see them on your screen. I do want to touch on a few of them. First and foremost, the survival aspect helps so many of us become vulnerable. And I think that just intersecting what's going on with COVID-19 right now and seeing how quickly our world can be flipped upside down and put us in a position where we are not necessarily able to provide for ourselves financially. We're not able to necessarily understand how this is affecting our mental health and things of that nature. And so I think that this year in 2020 was a great example to show and humble us as a community, to show us how any of us at any point can become vulnerable by survival. That could be we lose our job. That could be that we get our children taken away from us. That could be we lose our family. That could be we're grieving. That could be the fact that we just are in a position where one day things are good and the next day we don't know how we're going to put food on the table. Or this can be a generational survival. We have to be mindful that we live in a country that is systemically oppressed or oppresses many people systemically in all aspects, not just the justice system, but within CPS, within just the community as a whole. We have a lot of populations that are very generationally susceptible to having to just survive, whether that be due to their race, gender, sexual preference, whatever that case is. We have a lot of marginalized populations, which therefore leads us to needing to be able to survive. And that in itself allows us to be susceptible to somebody coming along to provide those things that we need to just get by day to day. And therefore we are allowing ourselves to do things or agree to things that maybe we otherwise wouldn't if we had those things given to us in a more morale way or more easily accessible way. Survival goes straight into poverty. The root of sex trafficking is poverty. And Armand is really great at talking about that. I'll let him kind of get more into that later. But without poverty, we wouldn't have a lot of the issues that plague our community. And so it's easy to see how those vulnerabilities are hand in hand. With poverty comes homelessness. Outside of just homelessness due to poverty, we also have to identify how our community treats and marginalizes certain groups, specifically to the LGBTQ community. We do not have many resources outside of just not having resources.
Outside in the front.
Outside of just not having resources, we also have a mindset within our culture where sometimes children or adults are put out literally by their families because of their sexual preference, because of how they identify as a gender or with gender. And so this creates them it puts them in a very vulnerable position with just that basic necessity of needing somewhere to lay their head at night. And so again, that allows somebody to swoop in and say, hey, I have this for you. I can offer you a place to stay. All you have to do is A, B, and C for me. Addiction. Oftentimes, a lot of people think that the reason people are going out to prostitute themselves or become exploited is to build or to support an addictive habit. In my experience, I actually developed an addiction to be able to cope and numb with what I was doing. And so my addiction came afterwards, and it became this vicious cycle of needing to numb out from what I was doing, but then being stuck in my addiction pattern and not being able to break that cycle. And so I just want to be clear that not always that you see somebody out prostituting themselves or being prostituted, does that necessarily mean that they're doing it to support a habit? Sometimes that habit is developed as a coping mechanism. There's other issues that make us very vulnerable as a individual and as a society, such as suppressed trauma that's not dealt with, spaces that are not being created for people to be able to come forward and express how they're feeling. And so those things manifest as anger, they manifest as self-hate, they manifest as that lack or that need for acceptance. And so that trauma lingers from when we're a child all the way. It doesn't go anywhere, right? It just stays inside of us. And so it lingers into our adulthood, which makes us easily vulnerable adults, just as a child is vulnerable through their trauma. And so that suppressed trauma really creates that vulnerability. Mental health challenges, I am assuming I don't need to go too far into depth of how we don't have enough resources before even resources, we don't have enough discussion around mental health and what is happening truly with mental health. Our stigmas on mental health help create that marginalized population where people feel isolated, feel misunderstood, feel embarrassed to even get help for those mental health challenges. And so they're not being properly dealt with, whether that be through medication or through internal holistic healing. And so those mental health challenges are manifesting as making us vulnerable, whether that be leading into addiction or that lead into other addictive or toxic behaviors so that we can deal with that mental health. There's other things such as learning disabilities, teen pregnancy, things that affect our teens and us in our younger years that we are not readily able or willing to identify or have conversations around with our youth. And so those youth become vulnerable and eventually turn into vulnerable adults. A huge one, especially in our time, is going to be social media influences. If you can believe it, social media can make us extremely vulnerable. Just scrolling through the wrong timelines can make us desire a certain level of acceptance. It can make us desire for our bodies to look a certain way. It can make us desire to obtain certain material things. And then we see the solution to obtain those things is by going to the strip club or by using our bodies or by using what God has given us in exchange for money, things like that. And so social media in itself is a huge vulnerability, especially for an adolescent mind, that all they're seeing is this glamorization of this lifestyle and of how women are being treated and how men are being treated as nothing more than what their body is worth, or how many likes they can get, or how how ratchet they can be on TikTok or Snapchat or whatever the new platform is. So social media is a huge influence and vulnerability. And then things that come down to what I feel are pretty obvious is like home structure and lack of fathers in the household, lack of mothers in the household. A lot of generations are being raised by grandparents. Grandparents are very detached from what's going on. They're two different generations, right? And so some grandparents don't even know what to look for when it comes to what the youth they're taking care of is doing on social media. And so it's creating this space of like this just open acceptability to be able to put these kids in positions to have easy access without anybody paying attention to what's going on in their life to become exploited or become victims of other crimes. Lack of home structure also creates that lack of self-worth. No matter what the scenario is, when you have an absent parent or you have a family structure that isn't holistic and you're not being told that you're loved or that you are valuable or you're not being told that you're proud of, that in itself creates huge vulnerabilities within us because we seek that and desire that from outside parties, whether we are aware that we're desiring that or not. And so that creates a huge vulnerability from a very young age. Home structure, seeing domestic violence, seeing what your mother or your father accepts from the other party or doesn't accept, seeing how they react because their trauma was suppressed and they haven't learned how to have a healthy outlet. So there's all these things in the home structure. Everything starts at home, right? All these vulnerabilities that I'm listing, they all start with a base foundation of what's happening at home or not happening at home. And then there's other things that prevent us from being able to excel and which create vulnerabilities because it keeps us isolated into a situation where we're constantly in that survival mode. That would be things like criminal history, lack of equal education, lack of equal job opportunity. All of those things help create us, especially as adults, to create this this idea in our head that we're stuck in our trauma and we're stuck in this life of criminal activity, or we're stuck in this life of selling ourselves because we don't think that we have other options because the outside community is pretty much telling us we don't because we're a felon or we don't have a degree or we lack this and we lack that. And so we go back to where is comfortable. And the last couple of things would be things that I already touched on, which are simply the lack of love or money, stability, foundation, necessities, and the lack of awareness, not knowing that there are people out preying on your vulnerabilities is a huge way to become vulnerable in itself. And the last one is where we are able to relate on all levels, where every single one of us in this chat can now see ourselves as being a vulnerable population. All of us need, as a human being, and desire acceptance, family, control, and all of those things that are innately based in us. We all need those, and therefore we are all susceptible to becoming vulnerable to somebody to come in and exploit those out of us. And I'm not going to go through each of these. If you have further questions on any of grooming, what I mean when I talk about grooming is not necessarily that somebody is actually doing the act of being trafficked or experiencing sex trafficking, but it's all the things around us that are getting our minds to the point where we think that this is an acceptable and tangible lifestyle. And so that can go as far back as to a little boy and his uncle showing him, naked women back in the day, Playboy magazines. Nowadays, it would be probably pornography on the computer, and giving that little boy that mentality that this is what real men do. This is how real men feel when they look at this photo. And that is grooming in itself. When it comes to on the other side, that could be as young as a little girl being forced to sit on her uncle's lap or her dad's lap or her stepdad's lap or her grandpa's lap, even though she's uncomfortable. That in itself is a set of grooming, showing that you don't have a choice in what it is. If this adult says, come sit on my lap, you come sit on my lap, regardless of how uneasy it's making you feel. And so we have all these subtle ways that we groom our kids, even to the point of, I was just talking about this in regards to my son. I have to catch myself sometimes where he's like, Mom, I want this. And I'm like, okay, well, come give me a kiss if you want that. And I have to catch myself and not do that, because what that's teaching him is that if he gives me something, he's going to get something in return. And we have to catch those subtle ways that we are grooming our own children within our own households. Because like I said, it starts at home. None of these issues can be impacted that we care about if we do not start at home first. And so I have to catch myself with my son, making sure that I'm breaking that generational acceptance of that exchange, a kiss for a toy or a kiss for a piece of candy. Although I may mean it in a very innocent way, what that is embedding in him is something completely not innocent. And so when we come to the aspect of grooming, specifically for sex trafficking, as I already touched on, social media is a huge platform for grooming, whether that be just by us scrolling ourselves and seeing what is so glamorized about stripping, about selling our bodies, about getting our bodies redone and reshaped, and all of these obsessive compulsive ideas, which can lead to eating disorders, all of these things, the way that social media can groom us. And on the male side, the ways that social media grooms us in thinking that that's what makes you a real man. This is what real men do. This is what real men have, so you need to have that. Boyfriend and Romeo pimping is a real big thing in San Diego. Sometimes people don't even know that they're getting into a pimp and prostitution situation. Sometimes it's just literally two people that are in a relationship that see a way out and a tangible way out to stop struggling. Hey, you can go get money, you give me the money, and I'm going to manage it, and we're going to get out of this poverty-stricken life that we've been born into or that we've developed. And so a lot of times people are groomed through that actual relationship. There can be trauma bonding in there, as well as love, feeling like if I love this person, I'll do anything that I can for them, and vice versa. And so we do. Grooming can also come in the form of friends and family. Familial trafficking is a huge thing. It happens a lot more than we'd probably like to be able to admit, but when we're talking about stranger dangers and we're sharing all of these things on social media, we're often missing the perpetrators that are right under our nose, right in our households, at our family reunions, things like that. And we're missing those signs that we need to be able to recognize. Grooming can come in, catering to needs, fulfilling those vulnerabilities, playing on your vulnerabilities. If I think that I'm fat and I think I'm unattractive and this guy comes and says like, oh, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, I want to be with you. I want to build an empire with you. I want to build a life with you. If I've been told that I'm ugly or fat my entire life, I'm going to automatically melt into that compliment because that's something that I desire and crave. And so that's playing on those vulnerabilities. If a person has family or kids that need to be taken care of, grooming can come in that aspect. Hey, I want to help you with your sick mom. I want to help you with your kids that you're a single mother of or a single father of. I want to help you with that. And so they use those situations to groom you into being comfortable with thinking that you're a team and you're together on this, and that in order to do that, everyone has to give and take a little bit. The rest, I believe, are pretty self-explanatory. I don't want to be too repetitive. A lot of times, the only one I do want to touch on is media and entertainment is a huge influence, which I'm going to let Armand kind of take the reins on that one because he's really good at explaining that. But media and entertainment, just like social media, have a huge part in how children and adults are being groomed into feeling like this is really like the way to go. This is really what we should be doing with our life, because why not? And because it's so glamorized and normalized, and we have to do our parts as individuals to be able to break those cycles and be able to call out entertainment and media platforms in a way that holds them accountable. And lack of options and choices, or knowing that those options and choices exist. We have to be, we have to be real with ourselves and know that not every community is given the same opportunity as the next. Not every little girl and little boy is given the same opportunity and platform. We like to think that they are, but they're not. And so having those lack of choices and options really puts us into a position where we are being societally groomed to have to make decisions that are probably going to end us up in a traumatic situation, if not the system, if not on the streets, if not dead or addicted to a substance somewhere. And so fast forwarding so what do we do? So say somebody's exploited, somebody's in this, they want out. What has to happen for this person to get out? And so you'll see over where it says on my screen, it's the right side. Those are all the resources that you're probably going to be familiar with, right? That people are trying to figure out, how do we get more of these? How do we get more housing resources? How do we get more financial literacy courses? How do we get more job opportunities? How do we provide further education to this particular marginalized group of people? That is a second step. The things that have to happen first are the things on the left side of the screen. Before any of those things can work, any of those support systems can work, the people that are in this lifestyle have to first and foremost make the choice that they even want to get out. And it is not our job as a society to tell someone that they want to get out of anything or they want to change anything, especially if we don't have any viable options or tangible options that are better than what it is that they feel is going well in their life. So that person has to first and foremost make that choice to want different. Then they have to decide that they're willing to take those steps. And those steps are not just deciding that they want to go to a program. Those steps are deciding that every day they're going to wake up, and no matter how difficult it is, decide to move forward anyways and not go back into what their survival patterns are. Then they have to be willing to find the resources, because we are not doing anyone a favor if we walk hold their hand and do it all for them, right? They have to be willing to put in the work to find the resources that it is that they need to be able to support that choice of getting out. They also have to utilize their support, which is so important. I don't think I would be anywhere that I'm at in my transition if I didn't have a solid support system. And those are people not just babysitting me, not saying like, yeah, it's okay, like love and light, like everything's going to be great. No, it's those people that are holding me accountable that are saying, look, like you're messing up. I'm going to be here to support you, but you need to get your stuff together and you need to make a decision and remember why it is that you got out of the situations that you were in before. And I need those people around me to hold me accountable, but also the people that I can be real with and have real conversations with and not have to change my verbiage around, not have to change how I speak or how I move. And I can be real about my experiences. And so that support system of people that have not only been there, but also people that maybe haven't been there, but really have a genuine desire to see your life move forward. Those people are necessary. And we, as people getting out of this lifestyle, have to be willing and vulnerable to utilize that support system. And then after that, it's going to be knowing that there's options out there. It's not necessarily that there aren't these resources that are over here to the right. It's that sometimes we don't even know that they exist because, like I said, we have a huge population of people and communities that nobody's going into those communities unless you're from there and telling them that there's these options. And then if we do know these options exist, we have to pay attention and be authentic and real about the fact that some of the people that know these options are out there are not identifying with the verbiage. When I say lived experience expert, I don't say survivor of human trafficking because that's not my truth. That's not what I identify as. I didn't know what human trafficking was until after I got out of my exploitive situation. And so my verbiage, if I would have saw a sign saying, call the human trafficking hotline if you need help, I would skip right over that because I was not identifying with that verbiage. And so again, why lived experience experts are vastly important in this movement to bring awareness to exploitation and try to find solutions, because we have verbiage and we know things that you can't read out of a book, that you can't fake. And so knowing those options exist and then being that bridge, you have to be willing to be a bridge to getting to those options and letting people know that they are for them. And if those options aren't there, then you got to hustle your way to creating those options. And that's just sometimes what it is. You also have to be willing to change your habits, your routines, your environment, the people you're around, and most importantly, your mindset. You have to change and know that you are worth different options. If, like I said, that's the choice that you want to make. And then once you do all that, then we can focus on how do I maintain a house? How do I maintain a car? How do I purchase a car? How do I save money? How do I change all the things that I'm doing in my life to go and get all of these resources that are right here to the right? Because if I don't have those first and foremost, that foundation to the left, there's no way that I'm going to be successful with the resources that are to the right. And as a community and as a society, we have a job as well. It's not only on the person trying to get out. We as a community and society have to learn how to create a community that is prepared to embrace those that have these traumatic backgrounds. We have to be able to provide fair opportunities for them, not based off of what their past is or what their criminal history is. We have to be an open set of hearts and minds as a community to break the stigmas off of their past lifestyle so that they don't feel isolated, so then they don't want to go back to where they're comfortable, which is where they're trying to get out from. We also have to create a community where they can effectively become self-sufficient to maintain a life outside of that. And so we have a responsibility as a community as well. It's not just on the person that's making those choices to get out. And with that, I would like to pass it over to the man himself, Armand King, and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. Excellent job as usual. So Jamie, just quick, you will be switching the slides for me?
Maybe.
I appreciate you.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so just starting off, my name is Armand King, also considered a live experience expert. I'm the COO of Paving Great Futures and co-founder, seed planter of an organization that is changing lives every single day. We are reaching the hard to reach population that most can't and most don't want to. I come from a place of firsthand experience. I mean, I'll get into that and I'll break it down. And I know, I've been around this anti-human sex trafficking movement for since 2014 to be exact. I was pulled into this and I'll explain why later. Before this, I had never heard the term human sex trafficking. If you had asked me previous to 2014, did I know what it was? I would have said yes. And I would have said, yeah, that's some foreign stuff. People getting pulled into tankers and kidnapped and brought to America by way overseas. I would have told you it's just like the movie Taken. That's what I would have told you. If someone would have asked me, were you a trafficker or do you know any traffickers? I would have said, hell no. I was a pimp. My friends were pimps. My homegirls, my sisters, my cousins were into prostitution. They were hoeing. That's what I would have said to you. Two totally different worlds. But the more and more that I got involved and I seen what the word meant and how it was being paired up with the lifestyle I learned at the age of 16 years old. But then you start hearing these things, modern day slavery, you hear that term kicked around a lot. But to me and to my community, modern day slavery had been a term, but we were referring to the prison industrial complex, right? When I heard the term human sex trafficking, like I said, I didn't know what it was. But where did this come from? Like this new awareness push that's been for the past 5 years. A lot of you all here know this is maybe new to you. Where did this awareness come from? Where did this so-called new epidemic come from? And is it new? And without a shadow of a doubt, I'm telling you right now, human sex trafficking, sexual exploitation is not new to America. It is the foundation of America. Jamie, can you go to the next slide, please? I would be doing an injustice if I sat here and act like most people act, like this human sex trafficking is, oh, this is so new. America, we would never put up with this. No, America is the foundation of this. Let's not forget the country was started. This was the biggest human sex trafficking and labor trafficking epidemic, pandemic was the transatlantic slave trade. Not only were people utilized for their bodies for labor, they were taken advantage of. They were raped. They were sold. They were put on display. They were put in zoos. They were put in camps, sex camps, right here in this good old US of A. Slavery may have ended with the Emancipation Proclamation, but do you know how many slave owners did not tell their slaves they were free? Do you know how many slave owners continue to utilize breeding camps to continue to create slaves in this country? They couldn't bring any more over. Slavery didn't end. Okay. So we will not talk about human sex trafficking in institutions, in a society that is acting as if this is brand new and pointing their finger in the direction of what we call urban domestic human sex trafficking. Black men and still Black women who still aren't getting the same treatment as their white counterparts when it comes to survivorhood. Okay. So yeah, so I'm gonna go over these pictures just real quick. There's a guy in the middle. It's a white gentleman. He looks like Snoop Dogg to me. That's Cadillac. Cadillac was kicked out of Spain. He came here as a criminal, like most of the founders of this country were criminals, right? That were kicked out of Europe to come here and establish the new world. We know history. I'm not making this up. Okay, so this guy with the perm down here looks like it's pressed out. Looks like Snoop Dogg. Cadillac. I just find a lot of these things very, very non-coincidental. He's the founder of Detroit, which is a known city in America for like a pimp capital. Really, it's one of the maybe 5 top cities that in the pimp culture, subculture, we know as one of those main cities. He's the founder of Cadillac, Cadillac's named after him. Cadillac is the crown jewel car of a pimp. Coincidental? I think not. we'll get into that. One day I'm gonna write a book called The Real History of Human Sex Trafficking, right? And we'll even just, it's so many things you'll find out once you start going down the rabbit hole. The Yankee Doodle song. Yeah, it's a pimp song, but we'll get we'll talk about that. Why Yankee Doodle stuck a feather in a cap and they called it macaroni. Where'd the word mac come from? What is a macaroni? Do that research on your own. Macaroni wasn't a noodle before it was called a macaroni. What is a macaroni? Look up the Mongol macaronis. Look at the imagery when you look that up. This is not new. This is a learned behavior that is now people impoverished that go this route are being penalized for. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay. So before I even talk about the crack epidemic of the 80s, okay, and I'm bringing you up, and this, believe me, this is in no way, shape, form, or fashion to condone the lifestyle of pimping, the lifestyle of what's urban domestic human sex trafficking. For the record, because I know there's 130 people on here, 5 of them are going to twist my words. 5 of them are going to not understand on purpose. 10 of you on here are going to stick your fingers in your ears. That's okay. Meanwhile, we're going to keep doing the work and saving lives. But anyway, so after we had the biggest shift in what we call pimping and pimping and hoeing, urban domestic human sex trafficking, the culture's been there. It's been being established, right after slavery, where now the slave master couldn't just go and rape the woman at will, couldn't just go take Black women at will. The desire and the thirst for their bodies did not stop suddenly because slavery was now abolished. No, but now Massa had to come and pay. Massa had to exchange something because the people were left impoverished. The people were used to being taken care of. So now it was nothing for a woman to take some money or something from this slave master, from this male. Let's just be real, okay? It was nothing for that to happen. Now you look through the duration of time. We could look back. You've seen country western films. You've seen the saloons and the brothels. You've seen the girl with the bustier and her boobs hanging out that's taking the dude upstairs. The girl on the piano singing. You've seen these things. You've watched Gunsmoke. And I say this story often. One day recently, I walked into my house and my mom was watching Gunsmoke. She was raised on the show Gunsmoke. Some of you of age, you know what Gunsmoke is. And there was a lady named Kitty on this show, right, who ran the bar. Kitty had this Christian woman that wanted to revenge her husband's death, and to get the money up to do it, she had to come work for Kitty. So Kitty taught her all the different things and tricks and how to talk to men and how to get them in the room. This was a whole house, okay? This is part of American culture. You look at the audience that was in that brothel, in that bar, the mayor, the sheriff, the townspeople with money. That's who was there. And I'm just talking about this one show, but you've seen this show in many different forms. And this came from a place. Prostitution was not a bad thing here in this country. It's bad saying now. There's still states in this country now with brothels legal. Come on. It's okay in Nevada, but not in California, right? It's okay in Hawaii and Honolulu right now, but not in Ohio, right? So where are our standards at? Okay. But anyway, so the 70s established that was the most recent time where this urban domestic pimp culture kind of got a face. There were unwritten rules and regulations that were established in the 70s. Okay. The pimp was not looked at in the Black community necessarily as a bad guy. How do I know this? I'm only 39 years old. I wasn't there in the 70s. I have aunties, uncles, and dads and moms and stuff that told me, that I've been hearing before I knew what a pimp was, hearing my dad, who never was a pimp, but would talk about his brother who was and how they admired him. I would look at blaxploitation films like The Mac, like Goldie, with Goldie, a Superfly, and I would look at the culture that was going on. It don't take a genius to recognize. There was one particular scene in The Mac, the crown jewel movie of the pimp culture, where Goldie, Max Julian, who was an actor, but there's a scene in there where he pulls up in his nice car, gets out in front of the little kids and starts handing them money if they went to school or did what they were supposed to do. Okay, I've seen that scene emulated many times. Snoop Dogg's done it. Many people have done it. It's a factor in our culture, right? But that wasn't symbolic of how that person was looked at. Okay. But and really not because it was a right behavior, but because we've been so used to being under the boot of America, of being impoverished, that any sign of success, any sign of financial come up, you were looked at like you're good. That's why trap music and drug selling is so idolized these days, even more than college or a 9 to 5 that pays well. That's what promoted to us. Okay, so 70s came into also at that time. What we had from the late 60s into the 70s, we had the Black Power movement, we had the US organization, we had the Bloods and Crips then that weren't the Bloods and Crips of today. They were Bloods and Crips that were actually defending their city and their towns against white racist attacks. Later on it became something else with this thing called the 80s that I call the Black Plague era. This was a time where suddenly these impoverished communities throughout America, simultaneously around 1985, when the world went crazy, now suddenly these poor communities have an influx of drugs and guns. I've watched many documentaries. I'm on Netflix. Believe me, if there was a story out about a black man that went and got cocaine from Colombia and brought it over, or smuggled it across the border and brought it into these communities, we would have seen the documentary by now. We have yet to hear that story about that black man, black woman that owned the plane that was flying it in. So where did the drugs come from? Where did this influx of guns come from suddenly? I have yet to see the documentary about one factory that was owned, gun factory, anything. But yet even today we hear stories about crates of guns and bricks being found in random places in the hood in Chicago. I'm not dumb. I'm not no conspiracy theorist. These are facts, right? So this Black Plague, this crack epidemic destroyed our communities across the board, wiped out families. With that became the turnover of the Bloods and Crips to where now they're fighting over territory because this drug is there. And not just that, let's go back a little bit before, when the 70s, like strategically, our federal government went and murdered or incarcerated all black leadership that they could find. J. Edgar Hoover's own writings go out and find the Black Messiah. His words, okay? Martin Luther King was murdered. Malcolm X was murdered. The Black Panther Party was destroyed, infiltrated, destroyed. So you take away the leadership from our community. You leave kids now with guns, drugs, and no leadership, no elders, no structure that was already in trauma from the beginning. Okay? Crack era. Prison industrial complex, that's when we become the super predators. Late 80s, early 90s, that's when all not blaxploitation films. Now you're watching Colors, you're watching every gang film in the world, right? So we can put an image in our head of what those communities are. So when they come system and incarcerate them, criminalize them, the rest of society turns away because we're monsters, right? Next slide, please. Hey, there we go. So you had, like I said, you had the Bloods and the Crips. I'm talking firsthand from my lifetime, right? By 12 years old, Bell Middle School, where I attended, I was a homeless kid. From 12 to 14, going on 15 years old. We're homeless, meaning homeless don't mean you're sleeping under a bridge. And a lot of y'all know this because you deal with these populations. Homeless means I don't have a room, I don't have a door, I don't have a house to say is mine. We're couch surfing. We're living room floor surfing. Everywhere anybody could let us stay for the night, the day, the week. Okay, so I experienced what it's like to be homeless. At that same time, now I'm reaching out to only possible option for me to have some kind of family structure, love, and that's the gang. So that was my wannabe gangbanger era. And I tried everything in the world to be accepted, to be by the gang. And fortunately, people wonder, why do you go to the gang? Well, shoot, society's rejected us young black men and women our entire life. There's nothing we have to offer the society as far as what they've told us. There's nothing we have of value to give as far as what they've told us. But now the gang is here. And all I have to do to be accepted, wanted, and loved by them is to show heart. I got that. Yeah, I may have to fight or whatever to prove that, but that's cool. I'll do that. At least finally I have something accepting me. At least finally I have some kind of brotherhood. You know, I'm a child of I have 8 core friends, best friends. Not one of us had a dad in the house. Not one of us. 3 of those 8 dads were dead by the time they were 7 years old. So who was raising us? Okay, I can't remember anything a teacher ever taught me. I've tried, and I'm not just saying this. I'm not all the way anti the school system, but I am. We have some good teachers out there. I commend you. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of those kids that got one of those. I can't remember one thing the teacher taught me. The last time I can remember being educated by this school system was the 6th grade, that I actually learned something from school. But I remember every Snoop Dogg line from 1993. So the real question is, who was our teacher? Who is our teacher? Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. So from my wannabe gangbanger era as a little kid, we went into the mid 90s. I started my high school career at Helix High School. I've been to 4 different high schools around San Diego. At that time, I believe most of the people on here are from San Diego. So I'm going to talk straight San Diego. We don't have to talk nowhere else. We're going to be right here in our own backyard. So in the mid 90s, gangbanging had almost completely slowed down and stopped for young blacks in San Diego. Nobody recognized this as being a key error to come in and help us. Nobody realized that, like my friends, it was a clique era is what I call it. Over 100 different cliques formulated in San Diego. Some of them were branches off of the main gangs. Most were just created entities of friends, male and female. A lot of these cliques were composed of Bloods and Crips and different, we have 7 main black gang sets in San Diego. A lot of these cliques were a mixture of these. Never before had this been done. What was happening was a mind shift, and I'm 15, 16 years old. My peers are. We don't know what we're doing, but we were talking down on gangbanging, even though we're from there. Although we're not that we're nerds or weak, we're ready to fight too. But we had the opportunity to see our older cousins, our uncles, the people in our neighborhood either die or go to jail behind this gangbanging. We knew that wasn't cool. At the same time, simultaneously, there was a shift in the music. We could do a whole presentation just on the music and the main influence it has over the youth, over people, over the world, really, especially hip hop is what I'm talking about. So there was a shift in music. Previous to, I would say 97, it was mostly a gangster rap. California gangster rap kind of ruled the airwaves across this country. Then suddenly this shift started happening. You got people like, those that know, you can agree with me, because I call it the bling bling era that came next. Now we got this gentleman named Master P and the No Limit Soldiers, and we seen an influx. And no longer is the lowriders cool. No longer are the Dickie suits, gangster apparel cool. Now what's cool is big rims, gold, diamonds. We're not sitting on we used to ride little 16-inch, 15-inch, 17-inch, maybe 17-inch rims. Now we 24s and 26s, and whoever got the most gold, diamonds, and money, it's no longer who's selling the most dope and killing people, which was cool before. So there was a shift in our minds that went to money. Reflecting, I can't say what comes first, the chicken or the egg or the chicken. I don't know if the streets reflect the music or the music reflect the streets. And honestly, nothing against the rappers, because they come from the same misguided communities, fatherless communities we did, opportunity-less communities we did. So when this shift's happening, now my mind frame's changing. My outfits are changing. I'm putting away my Dickie suits now, my red feelers and my flamed up outfits. I mean, it's red all over for those that don't know. I'm putting that away. And I remember my friend that's in this picture you see me squatted down. My friend that's behind me took me shopping for the first time, buying me Nautica, Polo, all these different clothes I never would have worn in my life. We had this era we called the juicing era. 15 years old, I still didn't know what a pimp was, but we began what we called, and not just my clique, but just male cliques across San Diego, we were juicing girls. To be around us, you had to buy us Jack in the Box. You had to buy our clothes, give us some kind of money. We literally collecting lunch money at school. Kids. Then that day comes around think I was just about to hit 17 years old, and I came home with my friends, and thank you HBO and talking about media. Thank you for bringing this show called Pimps Up Hoes Down to the air, right? So 4 p.m. I'm looking at men, black men, women, mostly black women that at the time appeared extremely happy. At the time, I'm watching them talking fancy and having gold, and I'm admiring these cats. We're mimicking them. We're taking on their personas, and we're learning. And now we're sparked, because for the first time in my life, in my head, I seen an option that I could have. You know, I deal with the youth. We're in 2 middle schools right now with programs at Bale that I was at and at Knox Middle School. We're there. Pre-COVID, we were there. We interview the kids before they enter the program. What do you want to be when you grow up? Traditional question. None of them raise their hand and say, I want to be a pimp or a prostitute. Those kids say, I want to be a sports star. I'll say that. Some kind of sports or some kind of entertainment. The crazy thing is, those were the only 2 options I saw for myself as a kid. Now here we are 30 years later with the same options that the kids are speaking on. Kids that look like me. Nothing much has changed. So it wasn't long before I realized my little 5'7", 135 pound at the time, there's no sports for me. I'm not athletic. I can't rap, sing. So what now? What now? And I know people say these options are out there. We're in the land of opportunity. Yeah. But if you don't recognize those opportunities, if your community around you is not supporting or promoting those opportunities to you, then I'm going to do what my community's showing me. I'm going to do what that box that I was put in is showing me. And you cannot blame me for doing all that I see and I am raised to know. Right? So I think Martin Luther King, I can't quote him exactly, but he said these are derivative crimes. You know, the problem is not the person that tripped in the dark. The problem is the person that turned off the light in the first place. So you got our community out here now. We from juicing now, just getting turned on to this pimping stuff. We tried fast. Like, okay, enough information has been gathered by our 16-year-old non-thinking selves. And my homegirl, who works for Paving Great Futures today, she's the first girl I ever seen on the Blade on El Cajon Boulevard. First girl, known her since 13 years old. White girl, blonde hair, blue eyes, raised in a middle-class neighborhood with 2 parents that loved her to death. Wasn't abused. Wasn't misused. She was overly spoiled. So what brought her into the game? So these factors and things that we think are what pull people into the game, some of them are correct. But you can't just say, okay, my daughter's not gonna because she's okay. No. The streets are attractive as hell, unfortunately. And it will pull your daughter out the suburbs so fast, okay? And the solution is not lock all the black men up, because that ain't gonna fix nothing. We've tried that, all right? So you got a bunch of people who've been flashed the American pie their whole life, like myself, but yet had to settle for the American crumb of that pie. So we emerged into the game. By 17 years old, I was fully active. Right? Me and my friends were there. Saw that girl the first time come back with that money to give to my brother, my best friend. She wasn't mad. She was happy. He was happy. It looked like a good ordeal. So here we go, full steam ahead. All of us going after money. And as we're saying, like I repeat, and not taking away, there's many forms of human sex trafficking, like my sis Jamie said. I'm not talking about all of them. I'm not even an expert at all of them. And those that get in your face and just cover everything and they're an expert, walk away from that meeting. They're lying and coming from stories that aren't validated. I can't speak on those. I would be lying to you. I know this right here, urban pimping and hoeing, that come out majority out of Black communities. Okay. So when we merged into this, like, there was not a girl that was kidnapped. We actually even had the saying, by choice, not force. If you had to physically touch somebody or put them into the game, you were the wackest pimp ever. If you couldn't use your mouth and your mind to talk and to do this, then you were whack, right? So my peers, when we merged into this game, it wasn't just the men. Simultaneously during this period, the girls that went in, they were my homegirls. They were my blood relatives. They were people that I was in school with my whole life. We went in together, and this period of time, pimping and prostitution was the coolest thing we had going. pimping and hoeing, the best thing going. If you're fucking for free instead of a fee, leave me. You know, it was a way for us to leave poverty. It was a way for us to finally have something of our own. We created our own society away from society because society had never accepted us in the first place. So, like I said, it wasn't now at that young age, your mind, you're not thinking right. You have no conception of life. You don't understand the value of life, not your own or somebody else's. And you damn sure don't recognize the value in this woman. And not because I'm a black pimp from the hood. No, America has taught you since an infant that women are values are put on them for money and sex. You can't walk through a grocery store aisle and not look at a People magazine or something my whole life and not see a half-naked woman, not see something sexual. You can't. I picked up my first Playboy magazine at 6 years old. Hugh Hef is idolized by America. Come on. This is not new, and we didn't make this up. So we've already been conditioned, us, to put a value and sex attachment to women. The music continue to put that on us even more, and Hollywood media in general. I'm not making this up. You've been watching and listening to the same stuff I have, right? But during this era, for some reason now, another slight shift in music is coming, and it's just pimping is just being promoted to our hood. Some of y'all on here remember Nelly's song Pimp Juice. Some of y'all on here remember Jay-Z Big Pimpin'. These are two individuals that didn't pimp and were already rich. Why are they putting songs out like this? Why is 50 Cent making a song Pimp? Why? Why is MTV putting out a show called Pimp My Ride? Why are we making the pimp word so easy? Why? Okay. And why the whole world's dancing to Nelly's Pimp Juice, Platinum. The whole world's dancing to Jay-Z, Big Pimpin', spending G's, Big Pimpin' on BLADs. The whole world's dancing to this. Meanwhile, my hood mind is looking, listening, getting confirmation that it's okay, and watching music videos. You go watch Nelly's Pimp Juice music video. Everybody in his video is a real pimp. Minus Max Julian from the Mac. More confirmation. So I can name 100 other instances that let us know this was okay. Our mothers never sat out. All 8 of my friends that I ran with, not one of our moms sat us down and said this was bad or don't do it. They actually were kind of happy that we weren't gangbanging or selling crack. Remind you, they came up out of the Black Plague. So now to see their sons not selling dope, not shooting stuff up with nice clothes and nice cars and able to help them a little, oh, it was all good. So we were misguided. We manipulated ourselves. We brainwashed ourselves constantly by the words you hear these things, sorry to break up stuff you thought you knew. You know, when they say we brainwashing women, yeah, that brainwashing is happening, but it's happening across the board because the same way that you're told the pimp will isolate the girl so she's not around her family society, facts. But that pimp's also isolating himself. Neither one feels that they're welcome or want to be around those societies. So we get trapped in this funnel. That carrot, we're riding around chasing that carrot. You might have got a little nibble of it. People made a little money, but you continue to chase that carrot without ever reaching it. Now you're 17, 18, 19, 25, 27, 30 years old. You done bumped your head a bunch of times. You done went to jail. Your car's been stolen, all these things. And now you're 30. Your 20s are gone. You know, a lot of us been 20. I hope y'all been 20 before. You thought you knew. You didn't know. Teenage years, you didn't know nothing. 20s, you thought you knew, you didn't know. 30s, when you're like, damn, you kind of got a little bit of life up under your belt now. You're making a little bit better decisions, hopefully. You know, so by 30, a lot of people got out the game. This is not the biggest of the epidemic at all. What you're facing and what we're dealing with right now is the tail end. Yes, I said it. I work with this population to this day. It is hard to find a young man that's still pimping in comparison to what it was. Yeah, crack is still being sold today, but the crack epidemic is over. Yes, people are still pimping and prostituting today, but the biggest of the epidemic, y'all missed it. I lived in an era where 65, 70% of my peer group was pimping or prostituting. Girls would talk about other girls for not being involved. Men would talk about other men for not being involved. So where's the difference and why is it not happening like that today? Similar to like when we were growing up and we seen the consequences of the gang era. We got to see that. When we came in, merged into this pimp and prostitution era, there was nobody to look up to see, oh, no, that's bad. Oh, I could lose my life, or this can happen. But now I sit here on my arm, I have 4 names right here. That's 4 of my 8 friends. They're all dead. My best friend is dead. Okay? So we had to kind of grow out of this without no real guidance. So the kids nowadays, they had auntie that was a hoe. They had uncle that was a pimp, an exploiter. They had that. They got to watch those things. They got to live under them to see the consequences. So now they got a little bit more like, no, that might not be for me, where we didn't have that. So I'm proud that now we can go and talk to these kids and talk to these youth, and we actually point out the pitfalls because we know them, because I lived them. So they don't end up on somebody else's arm or Instagram picture with wings put on their body. Change the slide, please, Jamie. Pathways to trafficking. I just mentioned a bunch. They're right here. You can change the slide, Jamie. I'm running out of time. Okay. Why the game? The game was a need for some difference. Like I said, changing music, the cool factor. And I just went through all this right here. These slides is to remind, but we don't need to remind. Get reminders constantly. You can switch the slide, Jamie. We're going to talk about this buyer next. Before we even go into the buyer, I want you to know the buyer that existed in the past is the same buyer that's now, okay? And primarily, it's a Caucasian male who can afford to have sex. We want to stop this. Hey, believe me, my peer group from back then, the people now would not be in the business if there was no business. And then you might ask yourself, why aren't we as a society extra targeting the buyer? Because if we did, guess who we'd find? Senator blah blah, county whoop-de-whoop, lawyer, doc, your husband.
And I just want to add too, which I should have said at the beginning of the presentation, a little bit late now, but this definitely, when you catch, I know myself and I know Armand, just working with him enough, like I know some people are data people, statistic people. You're not going to get statistics when it comes to our presentations, because those are things that you can go and Google easily. You can go and Google those things. On top of that, if you look at where the data from those statistics comes, they're at least 5 years old, if not 10 years old. And on top of that, we don't have no census going out about, to pimps and prostitutes and buyers to ask the accurate numbers.
I laugh at these statistics. I laugh at them, right? Because the same ones just get regurgitated, and we're a headline reading society. We just read the like, it's 800,000 million, whatever, made in San Diego alone. I've heard and seen that same stat in different cities. And I'm like, do you guys not realize the propaganda and BS that you're being served, and we just regurgitate it? And then and also with these statistics, since there may be a lot of statistic people in here, it is impossible to get the statistics on how much money pimps are making. That was a made up number. Okay. And then with that, dissect that. We just told you, and we guarantee that human sex trafficking is different forms, and they're not necessarily mixed together. They may have similarities in some ways, but they're different. So where did this number come from? And I guarantee you, especially nowadays, these young Black men out here that are still involved in the game, they're not making no money. Not like that. Not today. They're better off working at McDonald's, and I tell them that too. You're putting your life on the line for $200, a hotel room, a pack of cigarettes, and some gas in your car. Not worth it.
And we have to be mindful. Like you said, the propaganda is important, especially because I can guarantee that there's at least a small percentage of you that are on this specific presentation because of propaganda that has been circulating very recently. And that is not to take away from the fact that there is awareness being brought to the issue of sex trafficking, but not all awareness is good awareness, and propaganda is actually very detrimental to any forward progress being made. Mind you, the progress being made is very, very small anyways, because we can't even have these real conversations to get people to understand the dynamics behind sex trafficking. We're talking about stats. If you go do a CSEC 101 or a human trafficking 101, you're going to see a bunch of slides with stats and regurgitated information. That's why the lived experience aspect is a very very real conversation, but a very necessary conversation, because you're going to get different information. And those things are actually regressing the progress that is being made, because we're focused on these stats, and those are all to create shock value. Those are to pull in money. Those are to get support financially. Well, grassroots organizations that exist, like Armand and myself and many other amazing people that are really boots to the ground doing this work every single day, are getting little to no funding. And so that those messages and those propagandas, be mindful as you are advocating, to know what is my advocacy doing? Is it being detrimental to the solution, or is it giving to the solution? So I just wanted to make sure that you pointed that out. I hope nobody's disappointed that you didn't get a bunch of slides with stats, but you can go Google them. I promise. Go to Polaris.com. You can go and get those stats. So what about the buyer? So the buyer, this graph is, so anyone who does like data, like here's kind of a little data, like nice little graph for you. That it is predominantly men. Now, don't get it wrong. There are women buyers. A lot of couples like to buy. And other, I'm assuming, is transgender, LGBT. I don't really know what other means, but I didn't make this graph. So predominantly white, middle-aged, well-off men, because like you said, it's a hobby. So this is literally called a hobby, right? We will hear the term hobby. And I want to point out too that, mind you, pay attention to verbiage once again. We talk about the victim and we say sex trafficking survivor. We're putting that person's business all out there, right? We talk about the perpetrator. We're talking about pimp or trafficker, which is just like a horrible concept that we have in our mind because of all the things Armand mentioned. Now, what are the terms for buyer? Buyer. Now, in the game, there's the term trick.
John.
Or John.
No disrespect to any Johns that are on here.
How nice are we to the actual fuelers of this issue, right? And that just goes into the factors of where privilege, we have to be identifying where privilege comes along in the fueling of sex trafficking, and really identify, if we don't attack the demand portion of what's happening, we're never going to attack any of it. And with attacking the demand has to come an attack on the societal normalizations that come with the demand. Porn culture, rape culture, boys will be boys mentality. Like Armand said earlier, where females are basing their worth and existence off of their bodies and how they look. And what are we doing as an individual to help that mentality and societal view thrive? Because I guarantee we're all doing something, even if it's just liking a photo of a woman who just showing off her body, that she just got all this surgery done, because we're promoting that idea that is what acceptance is. And so I encourage all of us to identify with ourselves, if not with somebody else, and hold ourselves accountable to how are we buying into the demand. We might not be buying prostitutes. We might not be going to the strip club, but we are doing something that is helping to promote this issue and continuing and allowing it to continue to thrive. So just hold yourself accountable, because we can't hold anybody else accountable until we identify what we're doing to help fuel this.
Okay, and just to dovetail off of what Jamie was just saying, just more of the same. I actually would like to, if we can go through these slides a little faster, leave some time for some questions, so we got to make sure we have time for questions, because I definitely want to be able to provide more value. We just said a whole lot. In a nutshell, the number one buyer is white men out here in America, is always been. And I want to also, let's go to our U.S. military. I once upon a time, I did serve as well. And I know firsthand there as well how much trafficking is promoted within the military, from the time you sign up to the time you get out. Ask any Navy man that's ever hit Thailand. Just ask them about if they've gone to Thailand, and watch the smirk on their face. I was recruited by my recruiter telling me when I go to Panama, I can't wait till you go there. There's going to be lines of women out the door. The military and the American military are the number one supporters of human sex trafficking globally. Okay, so let's go through this. And let's get some questions. I definitely, before this thing is over, want to be able to give some more value to our people.
Okay. I do, hold on real quick before we move
Okay.
forward, because I wouldn't feel right not identifying. So I never want to leave any presentation demonizing any group, whether that be the pimp,
Right.
the buyer, or the female or male that's being subjected to the exploitation. So I do want to identify that although the similarities in somebody victimized as well as someone who's doing the victimization, AKA the survivor and the pimp, or trafficker, whatever, um, they might not hold the same vulnerabilities as the person that is purchasing sex, but I do want to be aware that and support my idea that the root causes in our society really help this issue thrive. And what I mean by that is there's a reason people are paying for sex, whether that be because they feel entitled and privileged and allowed to do it, or it's deeper than that, where they don't feel comfortable because of their self-worth to go to a bar, go to a restaurant, or go out to the club to find that genuine connection. And so this is an option for them. And so I need not to justify any actions, but once we can identify where those root issues are coming from to help this thrive, that's when we can really start finding those solutions. Because if we can give an outlet for these men and women who are buying to come and be honest with themselves as to why they're buying, then that's how we can start deflecting away from the issue and start focusing on the actual healing aspects that come along with this. And so it's very much necessary for us to hold people accountable, but also to figure out where these issues are really stemming from. And so the buyer has just as much internal battles going on as the person that's doing the pimping or the prostituting. And those are just a list of the possible diagnoses that somebody can have that can cause them to buy. We'll give out our information at the end. I just felt like I should have put that slide in. So with that, we will move on to any questions.
Okay, so I'm going through the chat box, and first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to both of our presenters, to Jamie and Armand. A lot of positive feedback, thanking Armand for the history.
So, we're getting into, I did forget to share one thing. Actually, I'll send it to Amelia. I do have a diagram, because this is directly linked with Domestic Violence Council. I do have a diagram that I would like to send out, or maybe I can post it, but you can Google it as well. It's an ongoing diagram, but it just shows the intersections of domestic violence and human trafficking, or those that may be experiencing it. And it's not funny, but it's what I say is that, a lot of HT ends up being, human trafficking ends up being domestic violence on steroids, because all of those aspects within domestic violence are thrown into these issues of those experiencing sex trafficking. And I'm more speaking on the victim side, but the mentality on the person doing the abusing in that moment is often very similar to that of somebody stuck in a domestic violence cycle as well. And so when you're approaching the situations, I say that to say, it can be very helpful to understand that those same mentalities, that cycle, we have the DV cycle, the DV wheel of why do people go back? Why do people continue to stay in these situations? It's very similar. So don't compartmentalize or separate the two. Just understand that every individual is an individual. So I will send that out to Amelia, and she could send that.